This is Cannaramic, and we're bringing you cannabis like you've never seen it before. And today we're so excited to have Jeff Siegel, who is an analyst. And for all those people who don't know what an analyst is, I didn't know. It's a person who deals in investing in stocks and all that world, but I'll let Jeff explain it. He's the publisher and managing editor of Green Chip Stocks, a research firm focused on cannabis investments. And you love MMA, you love CrossFit, you love trees, and you also write a lot of books and appear on Fox and CNBC. So you do a whole lot. Yes. Tell us a little bit, how did you get into the cannabis space? You didn't start off there. How is it that you're doing what you're doing right now?
Well, I've been in the investment publishing industry since '94, and I've kind of covered every sector there is. Basically worked as an apprentice under a lot of other analysts to kind of figure out how this whole thing works, and I became pretty good at it, surprisingly. And I was helping a lot of people make a lot of money, but it wasn't completely fulfilling because some of the investments that I was recommending were investments in company that I just thought were just horrible companies in terms of, their environmental track record, social equity, social responsibility. And it just never felt right. So in 2006, I decided to focus only on industries and companies that I believe are making the world a better place. It's this idea of investing alongside your values. In terms of cannabis, I've always been an advocate of legalization. I'm from Baltimore. I've personally seen what the war on drugs has done in my community. I've had a lot of people go off and fight these wars and come back and traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and all they want is their medicine. Many times it's cannabis and they can't get it. So the way I see it is if we can invest in these companies, we help kind of strengthen the industry, and we want to make it so strong that prohibition can no longer exist. And the kind of cherry on top is if we find the right companies, we can make a couple of bucks in the process. So it's kind of this idea of doing well by doing good. It's something I embrace, and it's been very successful for me and my investors since I started more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's something I think a lot of folks look for, that place, that meeting place where the things that you believe in, your values, line up to what you do in life. And it's so exciting that you were actually able to find a unique way to participate, because before cannabis, you were doing renewable energy and other kind of green related projects. And then you kind of found cannabis. And, what do you see as the opportunities with regard to cannabis in terms of investment, but not only investment, the ancillary benefits to the world with regard to cannabis, because it's so many different pieces.
Yeah, it's actually a kind of a complex web when you kind of dive into it. In terms of, if we look at the financial angle, the investment angle, this is a very new industry, okay? And it is an industry that I have said many times before, and I'll continue to say, it's definitely one of the greatest investment opportunities of the century. I mean, you're talking about legalizing a substance that pretty much most people use and use on a regular basis. I mean, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in the absence of legalization. So we know that people are using it it doesn't matter why they use it, for whatever reason they use it. So it's kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of like when they lifted the prohibition on alcohol. There are certain companies and certain people that just made a killing because they knew, look, people aren't going to stop drinking. We've had the prohibition on cannabis for nearly 100 years, and people still get high. People still use cannabis as medicine. So it's kind of, again, it's a no-brainer. It's probably one of the easiest investment opportunities I've seen in my more than 2 decades in this business. But the added benefit, and again, this kind of goes along with the social responsibility angle that I really embrace, is that when we legalize cannabis, there are a couple of things that happen, okay? And I think the most important thing is that we end this idea, we end this idea that it's okay to stop people and interrogate people for consuming a plant. And not just people, but people of color have, been the primary beneficiaries of the private prison systems. And what I mean by that is, people that look like me aren't in jail for a dime bag. Okay. Right. And that's the reality. But that's not enough either. Okay, just because we can say, you know, in a lot of states now, cannabis has been decriminalized. You know, in Baltimore, if I walk down the street smoking a joint, I think they can give me a fine or something, maybe like a $10 ticket. I don't even know what it is now, but essentially, like, they're not going to take me to jail, and they can't do that to somebody else who's not white. You know, there are laws in place now that exist because of the fact that prohibition is on the way out, because of the fact that medical cannabis is now legal in the state of Maryland. So I think when I say it's not enough just to legalize, it's also, we have to make sure that the people that have been negatively affected by the war on drugs aren't left out of the good stuff that's going to happen with legalization. It's really important that we make sure that the communities that have been affected most negatively by the war on drugs are the communities that are going to benefit along with everyone else. It's kind of, I mean, it sounds weird coming from me because, like, okay, I'm a white guy and I work in finance. So like, how does it affect me? Well, I mean, it affects my community. It just as a decent human being, you know, you don't want people going to jail just because, you know, again, like they get called a dime bag. John Boehner, you know, the guy, former Speaker of the House, he sits on the board of a cannabis company that recently got acquired by a bigger cannabis company. He's going to make $20 million from that deal. Meanwhile, there are still people in Baltimore that don't look like me or like him that are still going to jail for getting high or getting caught with a little weed. Now, how is that right? It's not right.
So you actually talk about capitalism, this whole idea that, you know, our entire system runs by capitalism, with Wall Street being a very big piece of that, as a catalyst for positive change. And I think this is what you're saying. You say historically capitalism has been a catalyst for positive change. Well, you know, my question is, you know, historically capitalism has been a catalyst for negative change, right? We see environments and green markets that you actually support that are, you know, raised and damaged by capitalism. Amazon jungles raised because making room for agribusiness. Oceans are abraded by corporate fisheries. And we already see how wealthy mega corporations are taking a foothold in the cannabis industry, right? So that's capitalism at work, you know, while the communities you talk about are languishing, right, still. So how do we turn this around so that capitalism actually works for positive good? Because there's so much that capitalism has done to deteriorate society. You know, we're talking about this now. How do we make sure that it happens with cannabis?
So I'll back up a little bit. In terms of capitalism, I don't think, okay, so capitalism is basically an economic system whereby the government does not control the ebb and flow of trade. Private industry does. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree that is a negative catalyst. I think that the issue is not the system of capitalism, but people that are acting irresponsibly within the system of capitalism. I mean, if you look at capitalism, some of the benefits of capitalism versus the antithesis of capitalism, okay, and countries that have had pretty much 100% control of economic development and trade. You know, the former Soviet Russia, you had food lines. Venezuela, there's, you know, lack of medicines. Cuba, I mean, to this day, it's very hard for people to get uncensored communication. You know, that is the result of 100% control of the government. You know, as well, I think, and I don't remember the exact number, but it's something like, you know, there are more than 50% fewer people today across the globe living on $2 a day compared to where it was in 1990. And this has been somewhat attributed to the opening of trade in places like China and India, where we're seeing a thriving middle class now that we didn't see 30 or 40 years ago. And that is a result of not complete, I mean, it's not unadulterated free markets. You don't have that anywhere, even in the United States. But I would argue that that is a catalyst for some of these changes. And it's hard. It's really, really hard because, you know, I don't think people get into certain businesses just to make money. I mean, you have a passion about something. So if I wanted to start, you know, if I wanted to start a CrossFit gym, you know, I don't start a CrossFit gym because I want to make money. And you're not going to make money starting a CrossFit gym.
Right,
okay?
right.
You know, because you're passionate about it. But at some point, you know, you get people in there that are so focused on the next quarter or appeasing shareholders that maybe have a large portion of that company, and all they're looking for is that next payday. You know, I like the bigger picture. Capitalism we've seen companies that have been around for, centuries, you know, without a whole lot of influence from the government. And again, you will have influence from the government, even in the United States, to a point that a lot of times I will argue with people in the United States saying we don't have a real capitalist system here. And I don't know if I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but there's sometimes the government gets in the way of these problems. And look at the president of the United States with the trade wars. It's a perfect example. Mm-hmm. So again, I think it's bad actors more than it is the actual system of capitalism. Capitalism, I can look at solar and say, okay, well, solar cells today are 95% cheaper than they were 40 years ago. That's because of innovation, which is spawned from free trade. Whoever's got the better mousetrap wins. Vegan and vegetarian food in the grocery store 20 years ago. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, you might find a veggie burger. Now it's like, I'm not even a vegetarian and I love all that food. It's like, wow, this is amazing. All the options that we have. Beyond Meat, or is it the Beyond Burger? I think they just went public, or they're going, just went public. And this is a huge deal. It's like, there's no way a government sponsored system would have made this happen. There's no way. You can't go to Ukraine and go into a grocery store like Whole Foods and see 80 different vegan options. You're not going to see it. So, I mean, and specifically in cannabis, the thing about cannabis is we're seeing the end of prohibition come not because of altruism. Right. And we're seeing it because of money. That's the bottom line. These states that have legalized rely on that tax revenue, and they rely on the job creation that comes from it. So, capitalism in this case is absolutely a catalyst for change, because we're actually seeing right now in Washington D.C. people, senators and Congress people debate whether or not we should let banks take money from cannabis companies and ultimately legalize cannabis. There's no way that would happen if there wasn't some money to be made in it. And I'm not saying that, from a much larger picture, that's kind of a horrible thing to look at it,
right.
But I mean, it is what it is. Right. I'm in this world and I'm trying to utilize what I can within the confines of what has been presented to me. So if it means that the only way we can legalize cannabis and get people to stop, getting arrested for cannabis for whatever reason, whether they want to use it recreationally or medicinally, if we can help our vets get their medicine, and kids with epilepsy get their medicine, all those kids that I know in Baltimore, they're in jail right now, just for a little weed. If we can end that, and it's because that we've been able to make the industry so powerful and so lucrative, then sign me up.
Right. It's understanding the game and, working within the game pieces and the playing of the game, understanding that. You actually mentioned the Safe Banking Act. Is that what you're talking about? Where they're debating about how banks could now take money from cannabis companies. Because that's a big barrier right now for people who want to be in the business.
Well, it's very huge. And so the thing is, it's pretty much a cash business, and you have people, dispensary owners, driving to pay their taxes, $25,000 in cash.
Oh my God.
Are you kidding me? And now they have armored cars now that will take that cash for you, but it's absurd that we have to do that. And it's the bigger picture to the banks being able to be involved is the free flow of capital. So right now, big banks cannot invest or provide banking services for cannabis companies. They want to. There's a lot of money at stake and they want some of it. But they can't make that move until the government says it's okay. The government says okay, then all of a sudden you're going to see this huge flow of capital come into the space. Because right now, guys like me talk to rich people and say, hey, do you want to invest in a cannabis company? If you do, here's the deal. And you're going to take your money and put it into this company, and they're going to pay you a huge, you're going to make a lot of money from this deal, because this company can't go to the bank and get a regular loan.
Right.
So, I mean, in that case, for us, it's a benefit, but I would happily give up that benefit if these companies could start using banks, because there's still plenty of ways to make money in the space.
Right. Which you mentioned this new opportunity with money coming from banks. It's really will spur all of these businesses that are just hampered right now. I think for you would probably be then looking as an investor. Investors would then look for what new businesses should I be invested in that are now able to free flow with money better. And that, as an investor, you're kind of looking at what's changing in the environment. how do I take advantage of new things that are happening so I know where I put my money at. Now, you have been predicting some successful stocks, of course. I know that Canada's Canopy Growth is now the world's largest medical marijuana company. They have 10 licensed cannabis production sites. They operate in 11 countries and in 5 continents. You called Canopy Growth as your pick 1 year before Canada went legal, right? And you know, people who listen to you are making tons of money now because Canopy Growth is huge. So what's your mojo magic to picking and winning cannabis stock? I mean, we need to understand how to do this.
I take an edible.
No. Step 1.
So, you know, it's really not much different than anything else that I've ever looked at as an investment opportunity within an industry. So with Canopy, and there were a couple other Canadian cannabis companies at the time. I actually probably recommended that stock, I think was in late 2015. So it was about $1.60 a share. So it did take, you know, 3 or 4 years to make a lot of money. I'm okay with that. So what happened was, again, I've always been an advocate of legalization. So I've kind of always been aware of what's going on in terms of legalization. And I saw that in Canada, something was happening. There's a huge kind of groundswell in terms of public opinion and also that which was happening in government. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of people in government that were saying, you know what, maybe we should legalize this. Maybe we should look into legalizing cannabis on recreational purposes. It was the most I'd ever seen before. So, sorry. It was the most I'd ever seen before. So I did a little research. You know, I went to Canada a couple of times, went to BC, went to Toronto, Quebec, and I met with a lot of people, and I wanted to see, is this legit? Is this really going to happen? And it was kind of 50-50 at the time. But then we saw that the new prime minister, who at the time was campaigning to become prime minister, he was getting a lot of support, and he was very, very aggressive about legalizing cannabis. Mm-hmm. And it was very apparent to me that if he were to get elected, that this was going to happen. Mm. There was no doubt in my mind after the interviews that I had done with all these people within, not just within government, but also just people I knew that worked in the industry. So I started, you know, searching around to say, okay, who's out there? Who's making the medical? Because medical cannabis was already legal in Canada. So, okay, who are the biggest players? Who are the most well-funded players? Who are the smartest management teams? Oftentimes I'll tell people I don't really invest in companies. I invest in management. You know, I invest in smart people. Okay. So I looked around and I found a few companies. I'm like, you know, these guys, they have deep pockets, really smart management teams, and they have first mover advantage. So let's buy some of these stocks, you know, buy shares of these stocks, and let's just see what happens in a couple of years. I'm not a trader, you know, like I'm not a day trader. I look for companies to actually invest in. I want to invest in a company and grow with that company over time. To me, that's a responsible way to invest. The idea of trading, I mean, I get people do it all the time. I have no problem with it. I've done it in the past. I offer trading services to people. But for me personally, I like to actually invest in companies. And so that's what we did with those companies. Now, here's the thing. I had no idea it was going to happen this fast. I figured, okay, we'll buy some Canopy, we'll buy some Afria, some Organigram Holdings is another one. And maybe, you know, 6-7 years down the road, we'll get a nice double. You know, Canopy Growth 3 years is up 3,000%. Wow. So I can't sit here and say, I knew this was going to happen, because that would be the hugest lie. And I know people say, I knew this was going to happen. No, they did. No, nobody, this kind of thing does not happen normally. Right. It was just really, really good timing. You know, outside of that, I attend a lot of conferences, a lot of finance meetings. I meet with a lot of companies. I meet with people that know people from other companies. I think in this space, you really do have to be well connected and know other people who are well connected, because especially in the cannabis space, it's very, very competitive. Everyone's got the best product. Everyone's got the best technology. And nah, not really, you know, and the only way you're going to find out is if you actually go out there and meet with these people and do site tours and ask around. Right. You'd be surprised of the information you can get when you know someone who maybe has invested $5-6 million in cannabis companies over the last few years. That person knows a lot. And I will talk to that person. Hey, what do you think about company XYZ? Looks like they have a pretty good product. Guy comes back to me and says, well, it looks like they have a good product, but I know this person. And, if you look, it turns out he was, he's under investigation for something from 10 years ago. You got to look in SEC documents. My point is, it's not as easy as just, I think sometimes with everything going on, it's kind of like Bitcoin, where it's like, oh, I'm going to buy Bitcoin because everyone's buying Bitcoin. It's going to go up and up and up and up, and I'll make a ton of money. You kind of see the same thing in cannabis. I'm just looking for a bunch of cannabis stocks. If they sell pot, I'm going to buy it. That's a bad idea, because you're going to get burned. And a lot of people don't really have the time or interest in doing what I do.
Right.
I love it, mostly, again, because I am an advocate of legalization, and I do enjoy the plant very much. So I think that's actually the reason I've been able to make this work. And so many people have joined my service, because like, I'm just doing the work that nobody else has time to do or really wants to do.
And that you enjoy doing. And I think that's, what people, I think what I've heard in terms of investment tips is do what you know, invest in what you know, invest in what you're interested in, because you'll be more informed and you won't be listening to the hype of people who have, just trying to get you to buy some stocks and sell you a service. So you basically are kind of in the know. You also talk to government officials, and kind of what's happening from a political standpoint. You watch that. That's stuff that regular people don't have time to do, and you're doing it.
It's a huge part of it, actually. On both the state and federal level, being from Baltimore, I have a lot of friends that work in DC now, so I do have access to information. And then, I do have contacts in pretty much every state. So if I know that something's going to happen, if legalization is on a ballot measure, or if some new governor's talking about it, for the most part, I can make a phone call and find out how realistic it is and get kind of the details. Again, nobody wants to, I don't know anybody that like, hey, what did you do today? Well, I called this guy in Lansing who works in the regulatory department for cannabis. It just opened up, and I'm trying to figure out, when they're going to, put these new regulations forward. And we talked a little bit. At that point, people are just like, I don't know.
I know, like once you say the word regulatory, it's like I just tune out. It makes me very uncomfortable. So
right.
You just in the same vein, and I'm excited about this conversation, because I think that one of the things that you talk about is social responsibility and socially responsible investing, and how impactful this is to our communities, especially Latino and African American communities. A lot of folks in these communities don't have the knowledge and understanding of even basic investing. I know I personally was never exposed to investing as a part of my upbringing. So like what you're doing is really, really exciting to be able to offer people the opportunity to learn a lot. I know that your newsletter and your membership program provides a lot of that. So that's really exciting. I just wanted to point that out. So your firm, you recently put out an ad in saying that on March 29th, 2019, a few weeks ago, will be the most profitable day in the history of mankind. Your ad went on to hint that this announcement that was going to be made on March 29th is so big that it will rank at the top of the most life-changing events ever recorded in history. And it was super hype. That's really hype. But what happened on March 29th? And did it stop the world, as Beyonce?
Well, the world's still spinning. So here's the thing. When it comes to investing and investment newsletters, it's a very hype-driven promotional thing. I've always personally had a problem with it. I don't really like that kind of advertising. And I've tried to write promotions that are very like, hey, here's what we're doing. And it's like crickets. Like no one pays attention. So typically when they see this stuff, they sign up. And then once they get on the site, like I kind of explain exactly what we're doing. But yeah, so basically that date, I was one day off, just one day. It was the following day that the state of Michigan began to look at the new regulatory system for legalization. So Michigan already has medical cannabis in place. Actually has the largest patient count of medical cannabis users in the country. I think maybe California might be higher. So it's actually a very big market that a lot of people don't think about too much. But then the voters voted to legalize recreational cannabis last year. So this year they're in the process of getting all the regulations set up, figure out how they're going to tax it and get everything in place. So by the end of the year, the start of 2020, they can start selling cannabis. So it was this day or the day after that they announced that the new regulations they're going to start putting together new regulations, which is a big deal for me because that's when I'm making phone calls saying, okay, I need to know what these regulations are going to be or what you think they're going to be. Because based on that information, I can say, okay, I know that this is going to benefit this company that may have exposure in Michigan or is moving to Michigan, or it may not. I need to know this information before I can make that recommendation. Or maybe it's a company we already own, but I can say, hey, if I know, for example, this company, based on these new regulations, this one particular company is going to benefit immensely from that, I will put out an alert to my group and say, hey, company XYZ, they're going to benefit from these new regulations. If you haven't bought it yet, I'm going to up my price target. Let's buy some more, that kind of thing. Again, it's not exciting to anybody else but me, but for me, it's really, really important because, again, if I don't know what's happening on the regulatory scale, that I don't know what's going to happen in terms of who's going to benefit.
Right.
Compliance is a huge deal. And if you're not compliant, you will fail. I mean, I've seen very profitable companies, particularly in California, be wiped out overnight because they did not follow the rules. Right. And I've never been a big fan of, overzealous government regulation. And I can't say I'm fully happy about some of the regulations that are in place now, but I know they are necessary in order to get the industry kind of on track. Right. And again, it's not about what I like or what I don't like. It's about my members and myself. We want to invest in this industry. We want to invest in the companies that are going to make the most money and make the most impact. And if I know, again, what's happening on a state level in terms of compliance and regulation, I have a better idea of which stock is going to do best or which investment is going to do best. So
I can see how you get excited about this because it's almost mathematical to some extent, because you can look and you say, okay, well, what is this company doing? Are they in compliance? And then you can make a deduction and say, well, there's a high chance that they're going to be suffering with this new regulation that's going to be coming down. So I'm going to move my investment from out of this company into this other company and be able to provide really strong guidance. I think that's really, really exciting. To some extent, you're like a psychic. A psychic with
I wish
with data, because you're really using algorithms that are kind of mathematical to some extent to make predictions based upon movements that are happening. Absolutely. In the environment. It's really so. When New York and New Jersey a few weeks ago were looking at this issue, whether they were going to have adult use here, what were you doing at that time?
Well, I've been following the New York and New Jersey markets very, very closely for a long time. Been a little disappointed in how New Jersey has kind of panned out. I'm very supportive of Senator Booker's comments about it's not gonna be a deal unless there's some kind of social equity mechanism in place. I think that's one of the few issues where I would say I agree. Let's not move forward until that's in place, because once legalization is in place, it's going to be much harder to implement social equity mechanisms. So it's really, really important we do that. I think that may have been people were saying that's part of the reason that New Jersey kind of balked up to this point. I would argue that there are some certain people within the government that are still kind of holdouts from the previous administration that just by any means necessary don't want to make sure that legalization does not happen, and they know it's going to happen, but they're going to slow it down as much as possible.
Why do they want to do that? I mean, is it an ethical issue, or is there money somewhere else in not having legalization?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think one is just kind of like, you have people that still believe the kind of the old propaganda.
Right.
Still, there are people in office that will, to this day, say we should not legalize medical cannabis. When you say that, you're basically saying a child with epilepsy should go ahead and have 100 seizures a day because you don't like cannabis. Why? And it's sad. I mean, it just shows how effective the propaganda was regarding the prohibition of cannabis. So I think you have that in place mostly for kind of like the older members of Congress that they're just holdouts at this point. And then there are people that benefit from the war on drugs. There are politicians that get big fat donations from private prison corporations.
Wow.
It happened a couple of years ago where I think it was in Arizona. Some I think it was a sheriff's department and some private prison officials, or somehow deputized or something. It was very convoluted. Went into a school, shut the whole school down to find drugs. I think they found drugs in three lockers, and then they took these kids to jail. And when you read the report, they don't call them kids, they don't call them by their names, they don't call them people, they call them inventory. They're referred to as inventory. So we have 3 pieces of inventory that come in, and once they come into the system, they are paid by the government. The government pays them to hold the inventory. If that person is let go later that night and they say, okay, this guy is not guilty, you got to let him go. Okay, they let him go, but they still get paid by the government. It is a very, very shady practice. This still happens, probably not to the extent that it happened maybe 5 years ago, because we're more aware of what's going on and people have cell phones now and we can watch what's going on, but it still does happen. And there was that judge a while ago that was just sending all these kids off to jail because he was getting a kickback. It's like, this is the reality. And when you are able to legalize cannabis, it makes it very difficult to keep doing that.
Wow. So the incentive not to legalize cannabis.
Oh yeah. We've seen that. Okay. So there's a company called Incense Therapeutics, which they make a synthetic form of cannabis, and they also make fentanyl. So a few years ago, that company was kind of pitching itself as a cannabis company because it made synthetic cannabis. It's really a pharma company. It's not a cannabis company. And it was actually included in one of the biggest cannabis ETFs, which is exchange traded fund. Basically, it's like for investors, you can buy a basket of cannabis stocks. And they included Incense in their portfolio. And I actually called and I said, why is this company in here? This is not a cannabis company. And in fact, the CEO of that company spent something like, I want to say it was like $500,000 to help defeat the legalization efforts in Arizona a few years ago. So they don't want legalization because who's going to buy synthetic cannabis when you can buy the real stuff? And better yet, they make fentanyl. You can get addicted to fentanyl. You can't really, you can get addicted to cannabis, but not in the same way. So there's benefits to making sure that prohibition stays in place. So you have some pharma companies not so much anymore because they're getting on board now. And certainly the private prison companies, police unions are very big on this. Police unions have donated, I'm not saying all police unions, but there are sheriff organizations in New York have been very aggressive in pushing the anti-legalization movement. There's some big ag players, that don't want, if you are a commodity cotton grower, you don't want hemp. That's direct competition that'll wipe you out. So there's a lot of shady stuff that goes on, and that people really do. There are certain companies and businesses and people that want to make sure it stays illegal. It's not going to happen. We know it's going to become legal. My time frame remains less than 3 years. It'll be legal. But it's still going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight every step of the way. And even after it becomes legal, it will still be a fight.
Wow, this is some real information. I don't think people really understand the extent that there's so many forces that are operating to try to stop this from happening. And really, they're just slowing it down because, like you said, it is inevitable. But
Right.
I think that for the regular everyday person, they want to dip their toe into the cannabis business. They don't have any ideas for a new venture for themselves. They say, well, let me see about investing. You think investing is smart now, even with all of the legalities, the gray areas, the volatility. Can everyday people really get involved now? And is this a good time?
Yeah, it's. I think the best time to invest in the cannabis space is before it becomes legal.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we can look at Canada for a historical reference of that. So we were in 3 years before it became legal, and as the momentum grew and they knew legalization was coming, that's when you see like the big curve. You see the big spikes in the share prices. So we my portfolio, I have a very large basket of U.S. cannabis stocks. Because I know that as we get closer and closer to legalization, the value of those stocks will increase dramatically. Investing in cannabis is really not much different than investing in anything else. I think the only tough part is a lot of US cannabis companies trade on Canadian exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
So if you find a broker, an online broker, some of those brokers won't let you buy and sell stocks on Canadian exchanges. So you have to find one that will. But there are plenty of you can buy some US cannabis stocks over the counter, or even some trade on the New York Stock Exchange now. It's possible to it's much better than it was 3 years ago. It's much easier for U.S. investors to invest in this space. I'm a big advocate of risk tolerance. Don't invest more than you can lose. I'm not saying you're going to lose every penny you invest. It's very unlikely, but sometimes people get so excited and they put all this money into a stock and then it doesn't perform and then they lose all this money, and then it sucks, man. I hate seeing that happen to people.
Right.
Because whether they do their due diligence, or maybe it's just like they didn't understand that, again, you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. It's a very basic rule to go by. If you want to invest in the cannabis space, this is probably the best time to do it. At least for US stocks. Yeah. But it should be treated with the same cautiousness, I guess, mm-hmm. as anything else with any investment. Right. I've helped a lot of people make a lot of money in cannabis, and I always have to kind of remind people, yes, if somebody put in 50 grand into Cannabis Growth Corporation when I recommended it and sold it when I said to sell it, they made $1.2 million. That's massive. Like that, again, like stuff like that rarely happens. So I tell people that's a great score, and I will always talk about it. It's something that I'm proud of, but just know going in that it's unlikely that you're going to make a 3,000% gain on any of these stocks. Right. But you know what? If you double your money in 2 years, that's pretty damn good.
Right. So a person, when they invest, do they have to have $50,000, or are there opportunities for small $1,000 investments, things of that nature?
Yeah, you have $100. I mean, the one thing you have to remember is when you use an online broker, they charge a fee. So some charge $3, some charge as much as $20. Sometimes they'll let you buy Canadian stocks, but they'll charge you $50 for the trade. So when you buy it, it's $50. When you sell it, it's $50. So obviously, you're not going to invest $100 in a company that's going to cost you $100 to buy and sell. Right. But yeah, I mean, there's a company called Innovative Industrial Properties. It's a REIT, which is a real estate investment trust. It's basically all they do is they own real estate and they lease it to cannabis growers. And that trades on the New York Stock Exchange, and it pays a dividend. I'm not saying that that's a stock they should necessarily buy, but there are stocks like that exist. You put $100 in a company like that, it pays, I think, a 2% dividend. In 5 years, if it doubles, you make double your money, and you were getting that little bit along the way in dividends. Obviously, $100, if you double $100, it's $200. So that's more, I think, fun trading than anything. But yeah, $1,000. I mean, where else are you going to double? Where else are you going to turn $1,000 into $2,000 for basically doing nothing? Right. It's like they let your money work for you while you sleep. But again, you have to, there's always in the back of your mind, remember, no matter how good it sounds, it could always go down. So just be cautious.
How do you know when to sell, right? Because you only make your money when you sell, right? Because it doesn't exist in your hand. So how do you know when to sell?
It's different than, that's one of the hardest things about this job. It really is, because sometimes you look at a stock and you think, it's overvalued. It's trading way too high. But for some reason, I'm looking at the volume on this stock. I'm looking at all the hype. I'm looking at all how people are promoting it online, and it's being written about in Wall Street journals. I'm like, maybe I should just keep letting it go because other people are still buying it. And obviously, you want to squeeze as much out of it as you can before you sell it. I think that, well, there are a couple things I do. First of all, if I ever invest in a company and we double our money, the first thing I do is say, sell half, get your money back. Get your original investment back and let the rest ride. That way you don't lose anything, and you can redeploy that capital to another stock. In terms of when I want to sell in cannabis, so we sold a lot of our Canadian holdings right before legalization. because we knew there would be a drop off. The drop off wasn't quite as intense as I thought it would be, and some of those stocks are actually trading higher than they were when we sold them. But there's a saying, it's pigs get slaughtered. You know, don't get so greedy that you lose everything. You know, again, those were quadruple digit gains. They rarely happen. I don't really foresee many of those happening again. So if we can double, so like you know, if it's a solid cannabis stock, and I know that long term, they're going to be somewhere, maybe get acquired by a bigger company down the road, or just keep growing and getting bigger and bigger. And remember, we're in the earliest stages of legalization. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface of what's going to happen here. You know, I'll let it ride as long as the financials look good, as long as management stays straight, as long as all the kind of stars align. I'll keep it going. You know, and only will I start thinking about taking that money off the table when I see maybe some potential obstacles, whether it be within the company, outside of the company, any number of reasons. Again, it's one of those things that you have to stay on top of this stuff all the time. I have to know what's going on all the time. So, I mean, to give you an example, maybe tomorrow the governor of Michigan says, you know what, I don't want to legalize anymore, and they squash the whole thing. Now that's not going to happen. Right. But there are instances like that you do have to kind of, like, worst case scenario. It's kind of like that whole idea of risk management. You know, it's like you always you know, what do they say? Hope for the best, but expect the worst. Right. So again, don't mean to be a downer about it, you know, but the last thing I really want is for people to lose money. I really want people to make money and then you know, get that money off the table in a reasonable amount of time, and help build their wealth and protect their wealth. And I think that goes in line also with being a socially responsible investor, or at least an analyst on my end. There are plenty of analysts that will say, just keep buying, because they're getting, you know, they make money every time you buy. Yeah, I don't make money every time you buy a stock. It makes no difference to me whether you buy it or not. You know, so I think that analysts that will tell you when it's time to sell because of certain reasons, those are the analysts that you should trust.
So plant touching companies like Canopy Growth versus non-plant touching companies, you know, what are some of the hot segments that we're seeing that we need to keep an eye on in the cannabis space? People automatically looking at plant touching, but there's a lot more going on, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, I mean, you got everything. I mean, you have packaging. I'll wait till
I know, yeah. I live in
the fire department goes by. Okay, so I mean, you have packaging companies, point of sale systems, companies that provide point of sale systems for dispensaries, extraction technologies, retail technologies. There's a company that does compliance for cannabis related events. It's $1 million industry. You know, there's actually a company I was just writing about recently. They're not public yet. It's a full service human resources outsourcing company for the cannabis industry. Huge. It's $100 billion a year industry, but there's not a single one devoted to cannabis. Now, when prohibition is ended, I guarantee you a company like Paychex or one of those other companies are come in and buy those companies right up and spend a lot of money to buy them. They'll pay a huge premium on them. So yeah, I mean, you have to treat it like any other business. I mean, you know, IBM isn't just, you know, information systems. I mean, you go into IBM, you know, you have human resources department. They even have a social responsibility department. They have, you know, communications and everything. So, and you're seeing the same thing in the cannabis space now. And I think there's always an opportunity. Testing is a big one too. Lab testing, it's a huge demand. There's not many quality testing companies out there. That remains to be a huge opportunity. So it's not all about growth.
You mentioned a packaging company or Kush Supplies or something like that. What are they doing? And again, these are companies that they're not sexy at all, right? And you think, oh my God, this is a compliance. What is that? What is that? You know? Ugh.
It's so much easier to tell people to invest in an edibles company. I'm like, they make the best chocolate. Right, I'll buy some, you know? Yeah, so Kush is like a great example. So again, talking about compliance and regulations, there are very strict regulations on packaging in every state where it's legal. So if you are a company if you run a company that does packaging for other businesses and you don't understand the cannabis business, there's no way you're going to get into that industry because it's too much. You don't know anything. You don't understand the regulations. In the cannabis space, there are standard operating procedures that to this day still change every week.
Oh.
You can't run a business like that, and eventually that'll stop. But right now, that's the reality of it. So if you're a huge packaging company, why would you even bother with that? It's not even worth your time. Where Kush says, well, we know the industry, we know dispensaries, we understand compliance and regulation, so we'll make exactly what the states want, and then we'll sell it to these companies that need packaging. And it was this very, very smart idea. And there's some, they were kind of like the only game in town for a while. And there's some new ones that have come out recently. They're not public yet, and they may never be. Yeah, it's like, again, who thought of packaging?
Right. It's so
when I first got into this, I never thought of that until I met those guys right after they went public. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting,
It's sort of like another universe, but like an alternative universe, that everything that exists here that needs to exist there, and kind of looking at those lines of what needs to be created and who's creating these things. And it's all from the ground floor. So that's the exciting thing. Now, an investor needs to consider certain things before they put their money in the space, right? I mean, you talked about legal issues, you talked about volatility, scams. Like, what are some of the things that people need to really think about before they start putting their money in?
So first of all, don't invest in a company just because it has the word canna or green in it. Okay, seriously. I saw this in the solar boom, 15 years ago, where people would buy solar companies just because the word solar was in it, and half of them weren't even real companies. We're seeing that more and more in the cannabis space now because the industry has proven to be so successful and so lucrative. So I mean, I get hit up all the time from companies saying, hey, we have the best grow, we have the best plan, or we have the best technology, or whatever it is. And like with anything, I'll do my research, and more I'm finding a couple of guys with an idea, a couple $1 million, and they have a shell, which is basically a stock with there's nothing in it. Huh. There's a lot more of that now, and you have to be really, really careful about that. People that overpromise. I've seen companies that grow cannabis, and they talk about how that they're going to be able to grow more than canopy growth, and they can grow better. And like, no, you can't, because canopy growth has $200 billion. Okay. You have a shell and $1 million. So no, you can't. Okay. So like, I know right off the top, it's not true. So that's a big part of it. Volatility is still kind of there, not as much as it used to be. It used to be a situation where you could have a politician say something and all of a sudden it would affect the market 20% either way. It's not really that it's not that the case anymore, but I will tell you that in this next election, it will absolutely be one of the biggest issues that will be discussed. And every person running as a Democrat supports legalization. And when Trump comes out and starts talking about all his issues, he's going to support legalization because he'd be stupid not to. And he knows, and his advisors will tell him that it's going to lose him votes. So, this kind of stuff, when we get to the election, closer to the election, it's going to move the needle. It's definitely going to move the needle. It doesn't matter who gets elected. It's going to move the needle more so than others. I mean, there's some candidates that are very pro legalization, and they get in, sky's the limit. So there is still a little volatility there. But honestly, like, I think the biggest things to remember: don't invest more than you can afford to lose, and do your due diligence. Don't believe what people tell you, what they write about, just on face value. You got to do your own research, or at least work with someone who does this for a living. And I'm not the only one. There are other people out there that do this. Because it's very, very frustrating when I get an email from one of my members saying, hey, I just invested in this company. What do you think? And I look at the company, and I hate to be like, hey, listen, you just invested in a scam. Get your money out.
Wow.
But it's the truth.
Well, I'm super excited. I got to get my money ready. So I'm like, my money's sitting in banks and earning no percentages, and I got to get my money into the cannabis space. This is such an exciting time. I know you must be, every day is a new adventure for you. And I am just looking forward to seeing what the future will hold as this thing rolls out across the country. I thank you so much for everything you've given us. I think you've really given us cannabis that we've never seen before. I think people will get a ton of value out of this. And let's keep moving forward. Let's keep pushing it.
Definitely. It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.